You did it! You finally got your manuscript to the point where you're ready to hire an editor. I know it is so exciting, but before you dive into that relationship, I want to give you 4 ways that oftentimes memoirists struggle to get the most out of the editing relationship. You're not going to want to miss this. Stay tuned. You know what they say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is exactly what holds so many people back on their memoir projects. That is exactly why we created the Memoir Method Checklist, a full, complete list of every single step you need to take to get that memoir written, published, and marketed successfully. You can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist. One of the most common pieces of advice that I see floating around the internet is a really good piece of advice. Hire an editor. But unfortunately, what I see much, much less of is advice on how to actually work with that editor. And that's a real problem, especially for memoirists. Because as we're going to talk about today, when you're working with an editor on a memoir, a lot of the things that can go wrong are very, very different from the things that you need to pay attention to when we're talking about a novel, a work of fiction, or even a prescriptive nonfiction book that is not based on your own story. And that's why today I want to talk specifically to all of the memoirists out there about the particular things you want to look out for when you are hiring literary professionals to help you with your book. So let's talk about what is the problem that I tend to see here. The biggest problem that I see with all types of authors, whether you're working in fiction, working on a novel, or you're working on prescriptive nonfiction, things like self-help, leadership, business books, there's something really special about the process of drafting. As you are bringing yourself to the computer once a week, once a day, however often you choose to devote, there's this really special thing that happens between you personally and the manuscript. And as we transition out of that drafting phase, we are called to make a really clear mindset shift. While during that drafting phase, we're really in the thick of it, we're being creative, we're building out things the way that humans do best. But as we move out of that drafting phase, we need to move into a different type of mindset, and that is a business mindset. Now, memoirists, I'm speaking to you, so please don't turn off this video. This is really, really important because what I see way too often is that memoirists are so invested in the book. Of course you are. We are telling our story, our personal, raw story. We're putting our vulnerabilities on the page. But that unfortunately, because the book industry is an industry, we're selling our book to a market of readers, we really need to be shifting as we come out of that draft from that creative, internal, expressive side of ourselves and into a business side of ourselves. Now, there are a lot of reasons that this is really, really tricky. One very common one is that many memoirists have basically zero business experience and oftentimes even no experience thinking in terms of how business people might think. But the other issue, and the one that I want to dig into here, is that because a memoir is your personal story, because it is you on the page, it is easy to get so attached to the draft, as opposed to the finished book, that you are not able to make the best business decisions. You're not able to maintain the type of professional relationship that I know you want and need with your editor. So let's talk about kind of what the causes are here, because as we talk about these 4 major causes that I see, I think you're going to pretty easily see how to kind of navigate around some of these pitfalls. Of course, I'm also going to give you solutions throughout as we're talking about the causes. And at the end, I've got kind of a big piece of advice that you're going to want to stay tuned to. But if, as you're watching this video, you are following along at home with the Memoir Method checklist, I want to point out that we are on page 5 of that checklist. If you don't have the checklist yet, you can get it at pageandpodium.com/checklist. It takes you through all of the steps, but today we're talking specifically about strategies for polishing. So again, that's page 5 if you're following along at home. And I also want to give you one just kind of general caveat. I haven't done a caveat on this channel in a while. And that is that no matter what path you are taking, whether that is a traditional publishing path, a hybrid publishing path, or if you're self-publishing, no matter what, these are tips that apply to you. There is no successful book that has ever been written and published that did not involve a team of people. So regardless of how you're planning to publish, I urge you to think about how you can use an editor to help you shift your mindset from that creative, expressive place into the business mindset that is actually going to get that book into the hands of your readers. And I know you want that. We all want both. And good news, you can have both. Okay, so with that said, let's dive into some of the main causes that I see people encounter every single day. And there are 4 of them. So the first one is that because you have invited this editor to work with you on your memoir, you are suddenly in this really strange, nebulous place between the personal and the professional. And this can cause a lot of errors in judgment. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean. So when you hand over your memoir to an editor, oftentimes people are very excited at first. But when it comes time to actually send that document, there is a lot of hesitation, and that is understandable. Because while you have written your story for readers to read, most of the time, once you get to the editor, you really have not had a lot of eyes on it. Now, suddenly, you are working with someone you don't really know. Probably you found them either through a contact on the internet, wherever, but you don't really know them. And now they have every single detail of your personal life in front of them. Oh, it is so uncomfortable. I totally get it. And as someone who has edited many memoirs, I can tell you, we don't think of it that way. But I understand why memoir authors often feel really kind of unsettled by the fact that they are working with a professional who knows everything about their life. So when we think about this, I want you to kind of think about what it would be like to have all of your coworkers know all of your dirty laundry. Oh, it's so uncomfortable, right? And I want to give you kind of a mindset shift on this because while oftentimes people will come into this memoir editing relationship with that sort of thing in mind, sort of having all of your dirty laundry exposed like that, as I said a second ago, editors really are not thinking about it that way. And in fact, this can be a great motivation to flip out of that expressive creative world and into the business world. Remember that when an editor is looking at your work, they are not judging you. They are not judging your life. They are really not judging your writing, even though I know that's hard to believe. What an editor is judging is the marketability of your book. That really is the kind of secret to hiring an editor, is that as they are going through your book, they are not thinking about kind of loyalty to you or loyalty even really to your story. What they're thinking about is how to take what you have written and dial it up so that it really sings to your reader. And this is a really important thing, right? Because as we go through this process of editing, you are absolutely going to hear things you don't want to hear. And this is the point at which you want to remind yourself, this is not a note for my creative expressive self. My creative expressive self wrote the story I wanted to write. I got it on the page. I learned. I grew. This is a note for my business self. This can be such an empowering mindset shift because particularly if you fall in that first camp I described earlier, memoir authors who really have never thought about owning a business and don't really know kind of how to think as a business owner, you are getting basically free tutoring. You are getting an industry professional who is willing to work with you to think about not just your story, but where your story meets your audience, where those two really important entities come together. So as you're getting those notes, if they start to feel too vulnerable, too uncomfortable, oh, this person knows so many things about my life, just keep in mind, this is not about your personal self. This is about your business self. That is, in fact, why you have hired the best editor you could find, which I know you did, probably from Page and Podium. All right, the second cause of this discomfort that I see so often with memoir authors when they get to the editing stage is that very often folks will assume that all literary professionals or most literary professionals are freelancers. Now, this is totally understandable because many literary professionals are freelancers. It is a great model for many people, but not all of the people that you might hire, not all editors, not all ghostwriters, not all proofreaders, etc. Not all of those folks are freelancers. And in fact, for many people, when we are going into this kind of literary world, we often will start as freelancers and then transition into a larger company, a company, for example, like my company, Page and Podium, but there are many of us out there. And what that means is that oftentimes we will get a manuscript with an editor that the author is really excited to work with. And then they'll say, get an email from our project manager. And sometimes that's kind of jarring. And I get it. Just like I was saying in that first cause, when we turn our manuscript over to an editor, it can feel kind of like we're naked in front of a crowded room. And that is a terrible feeling. It is a feeling that you have to work through. And so it can be a little bit uncomfortable to realize that you are working with an editor who is not a freelancer, but rather an editor who has a whole team behind them. Now, it is totally up to you whether you would prefer to work with just one person or if you would prefer to work with a more full service company. Either way is totally fine. But the thing I want to point out is that that feeling of, oh my gosh, there are so many people that have access to this memoir. Oh my gosh, so many people know about me is great practice. As you have been planning, no doubt, for at least months, if not years, this book is going out in the public, right? This book will be in front of many people. And it's going to be in front of mostly strangers, right? What we hope is that we have thousands of strangers that want to read your book. There are not thousands of people on your editorial team. It's not even possible. But those that are watching, those extra eyes that can feel really disconcerting, just keep in mind, those extra eyes are great practice. As you are working through the discomfort of, oh my gosh, how many people are looking at this? Just remind yourself that is a feeling you're going to have to deal with later, right? We might as well get used to the fact that there are multiple people working on your book. Now, when you are hiring an editor from a bigger company, oftentimes it is just that editor that's looking at it. At Page and Podium, typically we'll have a single copy editor, and then I will usually check the work before it goes out. Either Emily or I will check it before it goes out. And then Laura, our project manager, is delivering. So it's just a few people that are going to be seeing your manuscript. But what I will tell you is, as someone who started freelancing and then built a larger company around literary support, is that when you have these extra eyes, it is only a good thing. Only a good thing. All of us looking at it, all of us looking over, all of us bouncing ideas around, that is something that you want. So, if you are somebody who's kind of encountering this situation, or you're kind of wondering how you might feel about a larger team looking at your project, I want you to keep those two things in mind. First of all, having a larger team look at your manuscript is great practice for that discomfort of the thousands of strangers that you hope will read your book. And remember, having a team is actually a real benefit. And in fact, if you go the traditional route, you will experience this. Many people will reach out to you from that press, needing this thing or that thing or this thing or that thing. Some of them haven't read your manuscript, actually. But as we're going through the process, remember that having that team in place, that actually is industry standard. So having the team in place is really good. Just use that to kind of ease your way into this business mindset, thinking about moving from that interior expression and creativity into the exterior sharing of your story through the book. Okay, the third thing that I have seen cause a lot of memoir authors to really struggle in this process of editing is getting in a rush. All of these are totally understandable, and this one is too. As you're working on that manuscript, it can sometimes start to feel like it is taking forever. Oftentimes in our group program, the Memoir Method, we will talk about this as the slog versus the chapter train. And when you are on the chapter train, things are going great. You're pumping out those words every single week. But there are often times that are going to feel like a slog, times where it just feels like you are dragging yourself to the laptop. You can't hardly get any words out, and when you do, you don't like them. So, when you get to the end of that process of drafting, it is very, very understandable that many people are in a rush, right? Maybe you even set yourself a deadline that you didn't hit. This is so common, by the way, so please be kind to yourself. And oftentimes, folks will want to make up that time in the editorial phase. So they'll want kind of a rush delivery, or they'll kind of want priority treatment. All of that stuff is great, and if your editor is able to provide that, go for it. But what I want to tell you, what I want you to be thinking about as you're transitioning out of this personal creative world into the larger external business world is that publishing is a long game. When you are in this stage of working with your editor, you have barely scratched the surface. Unfortunately, especially if you're going for a traditional deal, when you're writing that manuscript, that can sometimes be a shorter time period than the publishing process. I know it is unfortunate. We all want that book out. But if you can remind yourself that publishing is always going to be a long game, from what you've already been through, the long game of writing that manuscript, to the long game of this polishing phase where you're revising, getting external support, getting your proofreading done, all of that kind of thing, and then into the production phase, which again, if you're self-publishing, that's going to be you handling all that stuff. But if you're going with a hybrid or a traditional, they'll have all those pieces in place. And it takes a long time to get all of those pieces moving together. That's just part of it. So when you are thinking about how long this process of editing is going to take, the answer is it depends, and it very often depends on what your manuscript needs. So I know it is frustrating. I know it would be so great if you could get that manuscript back really, really quickly, if you could start that querying really, really quickly. But I promise you, it is worth it to focus on how publishing is a long game. You're going to be hanging in there for a long time, and hopefully that book is forever, right? So take your time. Don't get uncomfortable about this. I know it can feel like you really want to rush. Taking your time is always going to be better. And I promise you, especially when you're talking about your developmental edit, having that time for that editor to sit with your work and think about it, it is priceless. So make sure that you are allotting enough time for that. Make sure that that isn't going to make you uncomfortable. You're all right. Just keep in that business mindset. You've got time. The purpose is to bring your story to the audience. That is worth waiting for. Okay, and the fourth and final cause that I see so often is that oftentimes people have a lot of trouble accepting the feedback that they get from their editor. Now this is, again, all of these are so understandable, and it always breaks my heart when we have a client who, feels really resistant to our feedback. Unfortunately, that is part of the job for editors. We have to be kind, but we also have to be honest. You don't want an editor who is going to cushion all of those blows about the ways that your work could be better. But the thing to remember here is that even though feedback always sucks, it does. It always sucks to hear all the things that you could have done better. When you're writing a memoir, it is so easy to allow that feedback to not be about your manuscript, but to be about your life. And it is not. Remember what I said earlier. The job of the editor is to help you bring that story to the audience. That is what they are doing for you. They're not interested in whether you should or shouldn't have made XYZ decision back when you faced ABC consequence. We aren't really thinking about that. We are thinking about your story. And in fact, I will tell you that sometimes when I read someone's manuscript for editing or manuscript review or whatever it might be, and then I meet them, it often is difficult for me to put those two people together. Now, of course, I know when I'm reading a memoir and then I meet the author, of course I know that it is the same person. But once you've got your story on the page, there is a distance, and that's good, right? You should feel the distance, and we should feel the distance too. This is not inside of you anymore. You are expressing yourself. You have put this story outside of yourself, and that's a really good thing. So as you are getting this feedback from your editor, I just want you to realize that even though it's hard to hear corrections on your writing, it's sometimes even hard to hear feedback that's kind of optional. Remember that none of that is about you. None of that is about your life experience. None of that is about kind of who you are, your identity. It is only in the best spirit of getting that story to the readers who need it. So remember, it's not about you. It's okay to nurse your wounds a little bit if you don't like some of the feedback, but you'll be okay. It's really good for you as you move forward into that space of thousands of strangers reading your book, Amazon reviews, all of that stuff. Use it as a little bit of practice and just try to push forward into that business mindset. Remember, once you've got it out of you onto the page, it's not really about you at all. It's about what you can do for your reader. And what you can do for your reader is hire a great editor and then really work with them to make sure that you can execute their suggestions in a way that really truly fully aligns with what you're trying to do in the book. It's the best possible outcome and is absolutely what I want for you and everyone. Okay, so I promised you kind of one big solution, and I want to give you this big solution, and then I'm going to run down some kind of smaller implications for how this might play out. All right, so the biggest solution is to keep in mind the idea that you are your protagonist, that's true, but your book is not you. I want to say that again because it is so important no matter where you are in the memoir writing, editing, publishing stage. You are the protagonist of your memoir, of course. Your book is not you. There will never be a book that is large enough or rich enough or can contain enough to hold all that is you. It's not possible. Your book is not you. And the reason that's so important to keep in mind is that there's lots of little times along the way that you are going to be called on to recognize that. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're kind of working with your editor, you've turned your manuscript over, you've got your 20 chapters all lined up, all revised as well as you can, and you're so excited for their feedback. And when their feedback comes back, it says, I think you should cut chapter 19. Oh, I can't tell you the reaction that I will hear oftentimes when this is a suggestion that we're giving. Now, we are, of course, giving this suggestion in professionalism and love and kindness. Everything we do is in kindness. But I also know that there is no tone or way of communicating that is kind and gentle enough that those kinds of feedback don't sting. When you are told you have to cut this piece of your book, if you are in the mindset that your book is you, well, you are being told to cut out a piece of yourself. I know when I say it that way, it is so easy and so clear. But what often happens is that when we get that feedback, we slip back into this kind of creative interior place where our book is us, where we have poured ourselves into that book. So being told to cut things, sometimes even being told to add things, frankly, can really feel as though that editor is making a comment on your life as a whole, on how well you have lived that life. So repeat after me. I am the protagonist of my story, but the book is not me. The book is meant to serve your audience. It already served you in the drafting phase. So let's transition kind of out of this overarching solution. I want to give you a few tips that you can take away as you're moving forward with hiring and working with your editor. Okay, first tip, super practical, super logistical. Do not freak out when your editor refers to you in the third person. Now, this is not something that is as likely to happen, say, on a call, but usually when you hire a developmental editor, you will get some kind of written feedback. And very often, you will be referred to in the third person. So rather than saying, you did X and Y and Z, we'll probably use your first name or your last name just to give us a little bit of distance. Now, this feels so odd. I know it does, but it's actually a really important professional practice, particularly for memoir. When we are giving feedback, it is really important that we as editors are helping you to maintain that distance between the creative self and that business aspect. By referring to you in third person, we are helping ourselves keep that necessary professional distance, and we're helping you keep that necessary professional distance. So even though I know it feels really uncomfortable to read that, don't freak out. It's a really good thing. And I promise you, you'll be grateful for it in the end as you're transitioning all the way through into this business aspect of your book. Okay, the second really concrete tip that I want to give you is that even if you are self-publishing, you still do need to go through this process. Now, I hope that none of you have listened to this video or podcast or read the blog and thought, oh my gosh, I'm just not going to do it. I'll just self-publish. This sounds so hard. I know none of y'all are thinking that, but just in case someone was, remember that your story still deserves that professional business treatment, even if you're self-publishing. That doesn't mean that we're going to strip away all of the intricacies and nuances and details. Far from it, actually. Usually we're dialing those up. But what we do want to do is make sure that that manuscript holds together in the way your reader expects. There is nothing that will make a reader close that book faster than awkward phrasing over and over and over. Consistency errors, redundancies, typos, all of this stuff, every kind of area of this editing process, all this stuff is so necessary. In 2025, there is really no reason for any book not to have this professional treatment. And I promise you, your book deserves this too. Okay, and my last little piece of advice is, as you are working with your editor, just keep in mind, like any industry, editors have different styles. So let me kind of give you a specific of how this might show up. One of the things that we do for our clients at Page and Podium is we really want to make sure that when we do a manuscript review, we want to make sure we are pointing out the things that that author has done really well. And I have a very specific reason that I started doing that, and that is that when you can see what's good, then we kind of mitigate the risk that you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We want you to see where your writing sings, where your voice is really strong, where the structure is working, whatever the particular strengths of your manuscript, we're always going to tell you about those. Now, what we're not going to do is go in line with comments telling you every piece of writing that we think is beautiful. Sometimes we'll toss some in if it's a particularly lovely piece of prose, but usually we're giving you kind of a 10,000-foot view. And the reason for that is that while I do believe that having those compliments, having that kind of gold pointed out to you is really valuable, it's something I want for my clients, what you're really paying for when you pay an editor is for the editor to tell you how much work you have, to guide you in the kinds of things that you need to revise and to support you as you make those revisions. That is why you have hired an editor, not to give you all the compliments. On the other hand, especially if you are working with a traditional press, even a hybrid in many cases, where you have handed that book off, you might not see any of that. You might not see any kind of compliments or kind of niceties or things like that. You might just get the kind of bare bones instructions for what needs to change to make that manuscript excellent. That does not mean that there's no gold there. That does not mean that there's no gold there, I promise you. The reason that that editor has omitted all of the niceties and the compliments and all of that is just to be efficient. They're just trying to get your book through that production process as efficiently, quickly as they possibly can. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way that many places in the industry are set up. It's okay. Don't take it personally. So, as you are thinking about this, again, how you're going to flip from the creative to the business, this is a great thing to keep in mind, that as we go through that transition, oftentimes we will encounter different folks who are not invested in kind of the details or the story or kind of the pride of your authorship. That is you. That is for you to be involved in. There's other people whose whole job it is to ready that product, the product of your book, to meet the audience. And that's a good thing. We have lots of people involved. We want that team approach because we've got all of our bases covered in that case. Okay, as you are moving forward, either finishing up your draft or congratulations if you've already finished, keep in mind that it is a hard transition no matter who you are, no matter how you prepare, no matter how many books you've written. As you get ready to release this very personal, private thing into the world, first via editors and then your readers, just remember that this book, it is so special, it is so important, but it is not you. Make sure that you're able to hold that distance. Make sure that you're able to come to the project in a way that is going to serve that book. I promise. You're going to do great. Happy writing. You've got the story, you've got the idea, you just don't know the steps in the process. If this is what's holding your memoir back, I have got the solution for you. The Memoir Method Checklist is going to take you through every single step you need from idea to published marketable book. And you can download it now at pageandpodium.com/checklist.